Crimson Bargain. When her father was accused of treason, Lady Isolde of Ashenmere had no choice but to turn to Sir Aldrich Blackwell, the most dangerous knight in the realm. He leaned in, his smirk slow and knowing. "You seek a villain to save you, my lady," he murmured. "Tell me, what will you give in return?" Chapter 1. The Ashenmere Accusation. The parchment felt like ice in Isolde's hands, the royal seal of King Oberon a crimson stain against the stark white. Treason. The word clawed at her throat, a suffocating beast unleashed in the quiet sanctity of her solar. Her father, Lord Edmund of Ashenmere, a man whose loyalty to the crown had been as unwavering as the ancient oaks guarding their ancestral lands, accused of plotting against the very king he had served for decades. It was preposterous, a cruel jest of fate, yet the ink was dry, the decree absolute. Isolde lowered herself onto the window seat, the cold stones seeping through the thin fabric of her gown. The scent of lavender from the small garden below, usually a comfort, now felt like a mockery. Ashenmere, their home, their sanctuary, was suddenly a gilded cage, the bars forged from fear and suspicion. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the courtyard, turning the familiar tapestry of daily life into a scene of unsettling stillness. The clatter of a dropped bucket, the distant laughter of children playing near the stable, sounds that had always defined the rhythm of her days now seemed to echo with an ominous hollowness. Her father had been summoned to the king's court at Blackwood Keep 3 days prior. A routine summons, they had thought, a matter of discussing the upcoming harvest tax and the ongoing border skirmishes with the Northmen. Isolde had even teased him about his new doublet, the deep emerald green a stark contrast to his usual somber grays. He had chuckled, his eyes, the same warm hazel as her own, crinkling at the corners. "A touch of vanity, my dear," he had admitted, to remind the king that Ashenmere is still a force to be reckoned with. Now, that vanity felt like a foolish indulgence, a fatal flaw in the carefully constructed facade of their noble house. The messenger, a grim-faced young man with the king's livery emblazoned on his chest, had offered no details, only the chilling decree and the order for Isolde to remain at Ashenmere under virtual house arrest until further notice. He had refused her pleas for information, his eyes averted, his voice a monotone recitation of royal protocol. Isolde crushed the parchment in her fist, the sharp edges digging into her palm. She wouldn't succumb to despair. Her father was a man of honor, of unwavering integrity. This accusation was a lie, a fabrication woven by enemies she couldn't yet name. But who? The court was a viper's nest of ambition and intrigue, where alliances shifted like desert sands and whispers could topple kingdoms. Lord Valerius, with his envious gaze and thinly veiled contempt for Ashenmere's prosperity. Lady Annalise, whose sharp tongue and sharper wit concealed a ruthless ambition. Or perhaps someone closer, someone she had trusted, someone who had smiled while holding a dagger behind their back. The thought sent a shiver down her spine, a cold premonition of the dangers that lay ahead. She was alone, a woman in a world ruled by men, a pawn in a game she didn't understand. Her brothers, both seasoned knights, were away on campaign in the southern marches, their swords pledged to the king's service. She had no allies, no one to turn to for help. Except the names surfaced unbidden, a whisper of darkness in the gathering gloom. Sir Aldrich Blackwell. The Devil's Blade, they called him. A man shrouded in rumor and whispered tales of ruthless efficiency and questionable loyalty. A mercenary knight, his allegiance bought and sold to the highest bidder, his sword stained with the blood of countless enemies and, some said, even friends. He was a pariah, an outcast from the noble circles, yet his prowess in battle was legendary, his reputation a chilling blend of fear and begrudging respect. Isolde had met him once, years ago, at a tournament held in honor of the king's birthday. He had been a striking figure, even amidst the glittering array of knights and nobles. Tall and powerfully built, with eyes the color of a winter storm and a face that seemed carved from granite, he had radiated an aura of danger that had both repelled and fascinated her. He had won the tournament, of course, defeating all challengers with a brutal grace that had left the crowd breathless. But it was his gaze, that cold, assessing stare that had lingered on her for a moment too long, that had stayed with her, a disturbing memory that now resurfaced with unsettling clarity. He was her last resort, a desperate gamble in a game where the stakes were her family's honor and her own survival. He was also, she knew, a dangerous man, a man who traded in secrets and shadows, a man who might demand a price far higher than she was willing to pay. But what choice did she have? To do nothing was to condemn her father to a traitor's death, to see Ashenmere stripped of its lands and titles, its name forever tarnished. A sudden, sharp rap at the door startled her. Her handmaid, Alara, a loyal and trusted companion since childhood, entered, her face etched with worry. "My lady," she said softly, "the guards have doubled. They are questioning the servants, searching the grounds. It seems they believe Lord Edmund may have hidden something here, some evidence of his treason." Isolde's heart clenched. This was more than just an accusation, it was a siege, a deliberate attempt to isolate and incriminate them. She rose, the coldness of the stone floor a sharp contrast to the burning determination that now coursed through her veins. "Tell them they will find nothing," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Ashenmere has nothing to hide." But even as she spoke the words, she knew they were a lie. Ashenmere might be innocent, but she was not. She was about to make a pact with the devil, and the consequences, she feared, would be far-reaching and irreversible. She would ride out tonight, under cover of darkness, and seek out Sir Aldrich Blackwell. Her survival, and her father's, depended on it. The gamble was perilous, the path ahead shrouded in uncertainty, but she had made her choice. She would face the devil and pray that she had the strength to survive the encounter. The die, however risky, was cast. Chapter 2. The Devil's Bargain. The moon was a sliver of silver hidden behind a veil of scudding clouds, offering only fleeting glimpses of the treacherous path ahead. Isolde, cloaked and hooded, rode a sturdy gray mare named Shadow, chosen for its quiet strength and sure-footedness. The journey was perilous, the roads patrolled by the king's men, and the countryside rife with bandits and deserters. She had slipped out of Ashenmere through a hidden postern gate, known only to a handful of trusted servants, leaving behind a carefully crafted note for Alara, hinting at a desperate pilgrimage to a distant shrine. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and pine needles, the silence broken only by the rhythmic thud of Shadow's hooves and the occasional hoot of an owl. Fear, a cold knot in her stomach, was her constant companion. She was no warrior, no seasoned traveler. Her skills lay in managing a household, not navigating the dark underbelly of the kingdom. Yet, the thought of her father, imprisoned and awaiting a trial that was likely to be a mere formality, spurred her onward. She had chosen a circuitous route, avoiding the main roads and sticking to ancient tracks and forgotten paths, relying on a tattered map and the whispered directions provided by a grizzled old stable hand who had once served under Sir Aldrich Blackwell's father. The old man had warned her. Blackwell was a man of shadows, he'd said, his loyalties as shifting as the wind. He kept to no lord's keep, preferring the solitude of a ruined fortress, Blackwood Tor, a place said to be haunted by the ghosts of his past. It was near dawn when she finally saw it, a jagged silhouette against the pale sky.
Blackwood Tor.
A crumbling sentinel perched atop a windswept crag, its stones blackened by fire and time. It looked less like a fortress, and more like the skeletal remains of some ancient beast, a chilling testament to the violence that had shaped its history. As she approached, a figure emerged from the shadows, a tall, imposing silhouette clad in dark armor. He stood motionless, a silent guardian of the ruined fortress. Isolde reigned in shadow, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. This was it, the moment of truth. "Halt," the figure commanded, his voice a low growl that echoed across the desolate landscape. "State your purpose." Isolde took a deep breath, forcing herself to meet his gaze, even though she couldn't see his face behind the shadowed visor of his helmet. "I seek Sir Aldrich Blackwell," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. I am Lady Isolde of Ashenmere. The knight remained silent for a long moment, his posture unwavering. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, he raised his visor. Isolde found herself staring into the eyes she remembered from that long-ago tournament, eyes that were even colder and more piercing than she recalled. Sir Aldrich Blackwell, the Devil's Blade. He was older now, his face etched with lines of hardship and experience, a network of fine scars tracing a path across his left cheek. His hair, the color of raven's wings, was streaked with silver at the temples, and his jaw was set in a hard, uncompromising line. He was even more imposing, more dangerous than she remembered. Ashenmere, he repeated, his voice devoid of inflection. Your father stands accused of treason. It wasn't a question, but a statement of fact, a cold acknowledgement of the reality she had come to confront. He is innocent, Isolde declared, her voice ringing with conviction. It is a lie, a plot by his enemies. Blackwell studied her for a long moment, his gaze unwavering, his expression unreadable. And you believe I can help you? He finally asked, a hint of amusement, or perhaps mockery in his tone. You have a reputation, Isolde said, choosing her words carefully. A reputation for effectiveness, for achieving results, regardless of the obstacles. He let out a short, harsh laugh. My reputation precedes me, it seems. And what makes you think I would be interested in aiding a disgraced noble house? The king's favor is a valuable commodity, Lady Isolde, and your father has clearly forfeited it. Isolde met his gaze, refusing to flinch. I am prepared to offer compensation, she said. Gold, land, whatever you desire. Blackwell raised an eyebrow, a flicker of something that might have been interest crossing his face. Gold? Land? He shook his head slowly. Those are trinkets, Lady Isolde. Baubles that hold little interest for me. Isolde's heart sank. She had anticipated this, the mercenary knight's insatiable greed. But what else did she have to offer? She was desperate, cornered, her options dwindling with every passing moment. He leaned in, his smirk slow and knowing. You seek a villain to save you, my lady, he murmured. Tell me what will you give in return? The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. Isolde knew what he wanted. It wasn't gold or land. It was something far more personal, far more dangerous. It was her. Her hand, her body, her future. A marriage alliance, a bond that would tie her to this dangerous man, this outcast knight, forever. It was a price she had never considered, a sacrifice that seemed almost unbearable. But the image of her father, his face pale and drawn, his eyes filled with despair, flashed before her eyes. She closed her eyes for a moment, gathering her courage, steeling herself for the inevitable. When she opened them again, her gaze was unwavering, her voice resolute. Anything, she whispered, the word a vow, a surrender, a desperate plea. Anything you ask. Blackwell's smile widened, a predatory gleam in his eyes. Anything? He repeated, his voice a low, seductive murmur. Then, Lady Isolde, we have a bargain. He extended his hand, his gauntlet fingers reaching for hers. It felt like reaching for a viper, but there was no turning back. Her fate, and her father's, now rested in the hands of the Devil's Blade. And the price, she knew, would be steep indeed. The dawn broke cold and gray, mirroring the chilling certainty of her decision. Chapter 3. Shadows of the Past. The interior of Blackwood Tor was as bleak and unforgiving as its exterior. Stone walls, scarred by fire and time, rose to meet a vaulted ceiling lost in shadow. The air was cold and damp, heavy with the scent of mildew and decay. The only source of light came from a few flickering torches, casting dancing shadows that seemed to writhe and twist like tormented spirits. It was a place of stark beauty, a testament to a lost grandeur, but it offered no comfort, no warmth, only a chilling reminder of the violence that had shaped its past. Blackwell led Isolde through a maze of corridors and echoing chambers, his footsteps silent on the stone floors. He moved with a practiced ease, a familiarity that spoke of long years spent within these crumbling walls. He had shed his armor, revealing a physique that was lean and powerful, honed by years of warfare. He wore a simple tunic of dark wool, his only adornment a heavy silver ring bearing the crest of a snarling wolf, his family sigil, a symbol of his outcast status. He offered her no courtesies, no words of comfort or reassurance. He treated her with a detached formality, as if she were a prisoner, not a guest, let alone a prospective bride. The bargain they had struck hung between them, an unspoken weight, a constant reminder of the desperate circumstances that had brought them together. They reached a large, sparsely furnished chamber that served as both a hall and a living space. A long, scarred table dominated the room, flanked by a few rough-hewn chairs. A fire crackled in a massive hearth, casting a flickering glow that did little to dispel the gloom. The walls were adorned with faded tapestries depicting scenes of battle and hunting, their colors muted by time and neglect. Blackwell gestured towards a chair. "Sit," he commanded, his voice devoid of warmth. Isolde obeyed, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She felt a tremor of fear, a sense of vulnerability that she struggled to suppress. She was alone with this dangerous man, in his domain, completely at his mercy. He poured 2 goblets of wine from a chipped pitcher, offering one to her. Isolde accepted it, her fingers brushing his. His skin was surprisingly warm, a stark contrast to the coldness of his demeanor. She took a small sip, the wine bitter and strong, doing little to calm her racing pulse. "Tell me about your father's enemies," Blackwell said abruptly, breaking the silence. "Tell me everything. Who stands to gain from his downfall?" Isolde hesitated, unsure where to begin. The court was a tangled web of rivalries and alliances, where truth and falsehood were often indistinguishable. "Lord Valerius," she said finally. "He has long coveted Ashenmir's lands and influence. He is a powerful man, close to the king." Blackwell nodded, his eyes narrowed in thought. Valerius. A predictable choice. Ambitious, ruthless, and utterly lacking in scruples. Who else? Isolde recounted the names, the whispered suspicions, the veiled threats she had overheard in the weeks leading up to her father's arrest. Lady Annalise, with her sharp wit and even sharper ambition. Lord Harcourt, a distant relative who had always resented Ashenmir's prosperity. Even the king's own advisor, Master Eldred, a shadowy figure whose true loyalties were shrouded in mystery. Blackwell listened intently, his gaze never leaving her face. He asked probing questions, dissecting her answers, searching for inconsistencies, for hidden clues. He was like a wolf circling its prey, assessing its weaknesses, preparing to strike. As she spoke, Isolde began to realize the depth of her ignorance, the naivete of her understanding of the court's intricate machinations. She had lived a sheltered life, protected from the harsh realities of power and politics. Now, she was thrust into the midst of it, a pawn in a game she barely understood. "And what evidence do they have against your father?" Blackwell asked, his voice cutting through her thoughts. "What proof of treason?" Isolde shook her head. "I don't know. The decree mentioned intercepted letters, coded messages, meetings with known enemies of the crown. But it's all lies, fabrications. My father would never betray the king." Blackwell leaned back in his chair, his eyes studying her with a disconcerting intensity. "Perhaps," he said slowly, "or perhaps you are simply blind to his flaws. Loyalty is a fragile thing, Lady Isolde. It can be broken by ambition, by fear, by 1,000 other temptations." His words struck a chord, a chilling reminder of her own bargain, her own betrayal of her principles. She had pledged herself to a man she barely knew, a man she feared, in exchange for his help. Was that not a form of treason, a betrayal of her own heart? "My father is a good man," she insisted, her voice trembling slightly. "He would never good men do terrible things," Blackwell interrupted, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "I have seen it time and again. War, politics, love, they all have the power to corrupt even the noblest souls." He rose and walked to the window, staring out at the bleak landscape. The first rays of dawn were painting the sky with streaks of gray and purple, but the darkness seemed to cling to him, to this fortress, to his very soul. "I was once like your father," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Loyal, honorable, devoted to my king and my family. I believed in justice, in truth, in the ideals that knights are sworn to uphold." He turned back to face her, his eyes filled with a pain that she had not glimpsed before. "But I learned, through bitter experience, that those ideals are often nothing more than empty words. That the world is a cruel and unforgiving place, where the strong prey on the weak, and where even the best intentions can lead to ruin." He recounted his story, a tale of betrayal and loss, of a family torn apart by war and political intrigue. He had been accused of treason, just like her father, stripped of his lands and titles, branded an outcast. He had fought to clear his name, but the evidence against him, manufactured by his enemies, had been overwhelming. He had lost everything: his family, his honor, his future. Isolde listened in stunned silence, her heart aching for this man, this broken knight who had once been so much like her father. She saw now the source of his cynicism, his bitterness, his ruthlessness. He was a man haunted by his past, a man who had learned to survive in a world of shadows and deceit. "So you see, Lady Isolde," he said, his voice regaining its usual coldness, "I understand your predicament. I understand the desperation that drives you. But I also understand the price of failure. And I will not risk my life, my reputation, for a lost cause." "My father is not a lost cause," Isolde insisted, her voice filled with a newfound determination. "He is innocent, and I will prove it. With your help." Blackwell smiled, a cynical, knowing smile.
"We shall see," he said.
"We shall see." He held her gaze, and a spark ignited, a spark of challenge, of a battle of wills, of a connection forged in the crucible of shared despair. The shadows of the past had revealed a glimmer of understanding, but the path ahead remained fraught with peril, and the bargain, once struck, could not be undone. Chapter 4. A Night's Scorn. The days that followed were a strange, unsettling mixture of tension and tedium. Isolde was a virtual prisoner in Blackwood Tor, confined to a small, sparsely furnished chamber that offered little comfort or privacy. She saw little of Blackwell, who spent most of his time either training in the courtyard or secluded in his private study, poring over maps and documents. He treated her with a cool detachment, a formality that bordered on disdain. He rarely spoke to her, and when he did, his words were curt and to the point, devoid of any warmth or empathy. He seemed to take a perverse pleasure in reminding her of her precarious position, of the bargain she had made, of the debt she owed him. He would often look at her with a mixture of amusement and contempt, as if she were a curious specimen, a pawn in his game. He made no secret of his low opinion of her sheltered upbringing, of her naivete about the world. "You are a child, Lady Isolde," he said to her one evening, as they sat across from each other at the long, scarred table. "You know nothing of the harsh realities of life, of the sacrifices that must be made, of the compromises that must be endured." Isolde bristled at his words, her pride stung by his condescending tone. "I may not be a warrior," she retorted, "but I am not a child. I am strong enough to face whatever comes my way." Blackwell raised an eyebrow, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. "Strength is not merely a matter of wielding a sword, Lady Isolde. It is about enduring hardship, about overcoming adversity, about surviving in a world that is constantly trying to break you." He recounted tales of his battles, of the horrors he had witnessed, of the men he had killed. He spoke of blood and death, of betrayal and loss, of the constant struggle for survival. He painted a picture of a world that was far removed from the sheltered confines of Ashenmere, a world where honor and chivalry were often mere illusions, where survival was the only law. Isolde listened in silence, her initial anger giving way to a grudging respect for this man, this hardened warrior who had seen and endured so much. She began to understand his cynicism, his bitterness, his distrust of the world. He had been forged in the fires of adversity, tempered by loss and betrayal. Yet, beneath his cold exterior, she sensed a flicker of something else, a vulnerability that he kept carefully hidden. She caught glimpses of it in his eyes, in the fleeting moments when his guard was down, in the way he sometimes looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching. It was a pain, a sadness, a longing for something he had lost, something he could never regain. She tried to reach out to him, to offer him some comfort, some understanding. But he rebuffed her attempts, pushing her away with his words, with his silence, with his cold, unyielding gaze. He seemed determined to maintain the distance between them, to keep her at arm's length, to remind her of the bargain they had struck. The only other inhabitant of Blackwood Tor was a grizzled old man named Silas, who served as Blackwell's steward, cook, and general factotum. Silas was a taciturn, uncommunicative fellow, his face a mask of weathered wrinkles, his eyes filled with a weary resignation. He treated Isolde with a gruff courtesy, providing her with food and water, but offering no conversation, no companionship. Isolde spent her days exploring the crumbling fortress, wandering through its echoing chambers and deserted corridors. She discovered a small, neglected chapel, its stained glass windows shattered, its altar covered in dust. She spent hours there, praying for her father, for herself, for some sign of hope in this bleak and desolate place. She also found a library, a surprisingly well-stocked collection of books and scrolls, many of them ancient and crumbling. She immersed herself in the pages, losing herself in tales of chivalry and romance, of brave knights and fair maidens, of a world that seemed far removed from the harsh realities of her own. One afternoon, she found Blackwell in the library, seated at a table, poring over a large, leather-bound volume. He looked up as she entered, his expression unreadable. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice devoid of warmth. Isolde hesitated, unsure whether to intrude. I was just exploring," she said softly. "I didn't realize you were here." He grunted, returning his attention to his book. "This is my domain, Lady Isolde. You are merely a guest. A temporary one at that." Isolde felt a surge of anger at his words, at his constant reminders of her precarious position. "I am not your prisoner," she retorted. "I am here by choice, because of the bargain we made." Blackwell looked up again, his eyes meeting hers. "A bargain you are beginning to regret, perhaps?" he asked, a hint of challenge in his voice. Isolde met his gaze, refusing to flinch. "I regret nothing," she said, her voice firm. "I made a choice, and I will stand by it. But I will not be treated with disrespect." He studied her for a long moment, his expression softening slightly. "You have spirit, Lady Isolde," he said, a hint of grudging admiration in his tone. "More than I expected." He closed his book and rose, walking towards her. He stopped a few feet away, his gaze intense, his presence overwhelming. "But spirit is not enough," he said softly. "You need strength, resilience, and a willingness to do whatever it takes to survive." He reached out and touched her cheek, his fingers surprisingly gentle. "And you, my lady," he whispered, "have much to learn." The touch sent a shiver down her spine, a mixture of fear and a strange, unexpected longing. The knight's scorn was a shield, she realized, hiding a wounded heart. And she, despite her own fears, was beginning to see the man beneath the armor. The path ahead, forged in a devil's bargain, was uncertain, but the first glimmer of a connection, however fraught, had been sparked. Chapter 5. The Price of Freedom. The summons came unexpectedly, a raven bearing a sealed message from King Oberon himself. Blackwell read it aloud, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. Isolde was to be brought to Blackwood Keep to testify at her father's trial. The king, it seemed, was eager to conclude the matter, to make an example of Lord Edmund and solidify his own power. Isolde's heart pounded in her chest. This was it. The moment she had both dreaded and anticipated. She would face her father's accusers, she would defend his honor, she would expose the lies that had been woven against him. But she was also terrified. She was a woman alone, facing the might of the king and his court, a viper's nest of ambition and intrigue. Blackwell watched her, his eyes assessing, his expression unreadable. "Are you ready for this, Lady Isolde?" he asked. "Are you prepared to face the consequences of your actions?" Isolde met his gaze, her chin lifted in defiance. "I am ready," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "I will not let my father be condemned without a fight." "Brave words," Blackwell said, a hint of cynicism in his tone. "But words are cheap, Lady Isolde. Actions are what matter. And the king is not known for his mercy." He began to prepare for the journey, giving orders to Silas, gathering supplies, checking his weapons. He moved with a practiced efficiency, a soldier preparing for battle. He seemed almost a different person, his usual detachment replaced by a focused intensity, a sense of purpose. Isolde watched him, a mixture of fear and admiration swirling within her. She had entrusted her fate to this man, this enigmatic knight, this outcast warrior. She had placed her trust in his strength, in his skill, in his promise to help her. But she also knew that he was a dangerous man, a man with his own agenda, a man who might betray her at any moment. As they rode towards Blackwood Keep, Isolde couldn't shake the feeling of unease, the sense of impending doom. The landscape seemed to reflect her mood, the sky overcast, the wind cold and biting, the trees bare and skeletal. She was riding towards a confrontation, a battle of wits and wills, where the stakes were her father's life and her own future. Blackwell rode beside her, silent and watchful, his presence both a comfort and a source of anxiety. He offered no words of encouragement, no reassurance, only his unwavering presence, his silent strength. They reached Blackwood Keep at dusk, the massive fortress looming before them, its walls dark and imposing, its towers piercing the sky. Torches flickered along the battlements, casting an eerie glow on the stone walls. The air was thick with tension, with anticipation, with a scent of fear. As they rode through the gates, Isolde felt the eyes of countless guards, courtiers, and servants upon her. She could hear the whispers, the murmurs, the speculation. She was the daughter of a traitor, the woman who had bargained with the devil's blade. She was an object of curiosity, of suspicion, of contempt. Blackwell led her through the crowded courtyard, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword, his eyes scanning the faces around them. He seemed unfazed by the stares, by the whispers, by the palpable hostility. He was a man accustomed to being an outsider, to being feared and reviled. They were escorted to a small, sparsely furnished chamber, where Isolde was to be kept until the trial. The room was cold and damp, the only furniture a narrow bed, a rough-hewn table, and a single chair. A small window, barred and shuttered, offered a glimpse of the courtyard below. Blackwell stood by the door, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. "Stay here," he commanded. "Do not speak to anyone. Do not trust anyone. I will return when it is time." Isolde nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She was alone, surrounded by enemies, her fate hanging in the balance. She felt a wave of despair, a sense of hopelessness. But then she remembered her father, his face, his voice, his unwavering love for her. She would not give up. She would fight for him, for herself, for their future. She sat on the bed, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her mind racing. She tried to formulate a plan, to anticipate the questions she would be asked, to prepare her defense. But the task seemed overwhelming, the odds stacked against her. The hours passed slowly, each one an eternity. The silence was broken only by the occasional sounds from the courtyard below, the distant clatter of weapons, the muffled voices of the guards. Isolde tried to pray, but the words seemed empty, meaningless. She felt a profound sense of isolation, of loneliness, of fear. The price of her freedom, and potentially her father's, pressed down on her with the weight of the castle walls. Every whispered word, every turn back, seemed to carry an accusation. She was trapped, not just within the stone walls of Blackwood Keep, but within the confines of her own desperate bargain. And the trial, she knew, was only the beginning. Chapter 6. Whispers in the Court. The morning of the trial dawned gray and ominous, the sky heavy with the threat of rain. Isolde was escorted from her chamber by a contingent of guards, their faces grim and unyielding. She was led through a maze of corridors and echoing halls, the sounds of her footsteps amplified by the silence. The air was thick with tension, with anticipation, with the scent of fear and power. She was brought to the great hall, a vast, cavernous space filled with a throng of courtiers, nobles, and officials. The king, Oberon, sat upon a raised dais, his face stern and impassive, his eyes cold and calculating. He was flanked by his advisors, including Master Eldred, the shadowy figure whose true loyalties were shrouded in mystery. Lord Valerius, Isolde's father's chief accuser, stood before the king, his face smug and confident, his eyes gleaming with malicious intent. He was surrounded by a group of witnesses, their faces carefully composed, their expressions betraying nothing. Isolde's father, Lord Edmund, was brought in, his hands bound, his head held high, but his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and resignation. He looked older, frilier than she remembered, his spirit clearly broken by his imprisonment. He saw Isolde, and a flicker of hope crossed his face, a fleeting smile that quickly faded. Isolde felt a surge of anger, a burning determination to defend her father, to expose the lies that had been woven against him. She would not let him be condemned without a fight. She would face his accusers. She would challenge their testimony. She would reveal their true motives. Blackwell stood at the back of the hall, his presence a silent, watchful force. He had been denied permission to speak on Isolde's behalf, his reputation as an outcast knight making him an unwelcome presence in the king's court. But he was there, his eyes fixed on Isolde, his gaze a mixture of concern and warning. The trial began with a formal reading of the charges, a litany of accusations that painted Lord Edmund as a traitor, a conspirator, a threat to the realm. Intercepted letters, coded messages, meetings with known enemies of the crown, the evidence seemed overwhelming, damning. Lord Valerius presented his case with a theatrical flourish, his voice dripping with venom, his eyes fixed on Isolde, as if to taunt her, to break her spirit. He called his witnesses one by one, each of them reciting their carefully rehearsed testimony, adding another layer to the web of lies that had been spun around Lord Edmund. Isolde listened in growing despair, her heart sinking with each damning word. The evidence seemed irrefutable, the case against her father airtight. She felt a sense of hopelessness, a realization that she was fighting a losing battle. When it was her turn to speak, Isolde rose, her legs trembling slightly, her voice shaky at first. But as she looked at her father, his eyes filled with a desperate plea for help, she found her strength, her courage, her determination. "My father is innocent," she declared, her voice ringing out across the hall. "These accusations are false. These witnesses are lying. This trial is a mockery of justice." A murmur went through the crowd, a mixture of surprise and disapproval. The king frowned, his eyes narrowing, his expression hardening. Isolde continued, her voice gaining strength and confidence. She challenged the evidence. She questioned the witnesses. She exposed their inconsistencies, their contradictions, their hidden motives. She spoke with passion, with conviction, with the unwavering belief in her father's innocence. She pointed out the lack of credible proof, the reliance on hearsay and conjecture, the absence of any direct evidence linking her father to the alleged conspiracy. She accused Lord Valerius of orchestrating the plot, of fabricating the evidence, of using his influence to manipulate the king and his court. The hall was silent, the courtiers and officials hanging on her every word. The king watched her intently, his expression unreadable, his thoughts hidden behind a mask of royal indifference. Lord Valerius, visibly angered by Isolde's spirited defense, attempted to interrupt her, to discredit her, to silence her. But Isolde refused to be intimidated. She stood her ground, she fought back, she challenged him at every turn. The whispers in the court grew louder, the murmurs of doubt and uncertainty spreading through the crowd. Isolde's words, her passion, her unwavering belief in her father's innocence, were beginning to have an effect. She was planting seeds of doubt, undermining the carefully constructed narrative of the prosecution. But as she looked at the king, at his cold, unyielding gaze, she knew that she was facing an uphill battle. The king was not interested in justice, in truth, in fairness. He was interested in power, in control, in maintaining his authority. And her father, a powerful and respected nobleman, was a threat to that authority. The trial continued for hours, a grueling battle of wits and wills. Isolde fought with every ounce of her strength, every fiber of her being. She was determined to save her father, even if it meant sacrificing herself. She had made a bargain with the Devil's Blade, and she would see it through to the end, no matter the cost. But as the day wore on and the king's silence weighed heavily in the air, she began to fear that her efforts, however valiant, might ultimately be in vain. The whispers were growing, but so was the shadow of the king's power. Chapter 7. The Tournament of Lies. King Oberon, growing impatient with the protracted trial and Isolde's unexpectedly fierce defense, declared a sudden, unorthodox shift in proceedings. Enough of these tedious accusations and denials, he boomed, his voice echoing through the great hall. We shall settle this matter in a more traditional manner. A hush fell over the assembly. Isolde's heart pounded. What did he mean? A trial by combat, the king announced, a cruel smile playing on his lips. Lord Edmund, being accused of treason, has the right to defend his honor through a champion. If his champion wins, he is deemed innocent. If he loses, he let the sentence hang, the implication clear. Isolde's blood ran cold. Her father was a skilled warrior in his youth, but he was no longer a young man, and his imprisonment had weakened him.
He couldn't possibly fight.
And who would champion him? The court was filled with enemies, with those who sought to curry favor with the king. Lord Valerius, sensing victory, stepped forward. Your Majesty, I volunteer to fight for the crown, to prove Lord Edmund's guilt beyond any doubt. The king nodded, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction. Very well. And who will stand for Lord Edmund? Silence. No one dared to speak, to risk the king's wrath, to challenge Valerius, a renowned and ruthless swordsman. Isolde looked around desperately, her eyes searching for a friendly face, a sign of hope. But there was none. Her father looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and resignation. He knew he was doomed. Then, a voice broke the silence, a voice that sent a shiver down Isolde's spine. I will. All eyes turned to the back of the hall, to the figure of Sir Aldrich Blackwell. He stepped forward, his movements deliberate, his gaze unwavering, his presence radiating a silent power that filled the vast chamber. A gasp went through the crowd. The Devil's Blade, the outcast knight, the man who had been banished from court, his name synonymous with danger and betrayal. What was he doing? The king frowned, his displeasure evident. Sir Aldrich, he said, his voice cold and sharp. You are not welcome here. You have no standing in this court. Blackwell met the king's gaze, his expression unyielding. I am here by right of the ancient laws, he said, his voice calm and resolute. Any man accused of treason has the right to a champion, and I choose to exercise that right on behalf of Lord Edmund. You dare? The king thundered, his face red with anger. You, a disgraced knight, a mercenary, a man without honor? My honor is my own, Blackwell retorted, his voice ringing with defiance. And I choose to defend a man I believe to be innocent. Isolde watched in stunned silence, her heart filled with a mixture of hope and disbelief. Blackwell, the man she had feared, the man she had bargained with, was now her father's champion, her only hope. Lord Valerius, visibly shaken by Blackwell's unexpected intervention, protested vehemently. Your Majesty, this is outrageous. Blackwell is a known traitor, a man who cannot be trusted. He is clearly in league with the accused. The king hesitated, his eyes flickering between Blackwell and Valerius. He was clearly torn. He wanted to condemn Lord Edmund, to make an example of him. But he also knew that Blackwell was a formidable warrior, a man who could defeat even the most skilled swordsman. And to deny him the right to champion Lord Edmund would be a violation of the ancient laws, a breach of tradition that could undermine his own authority. He glanced from Aldrich to Isolde, a flicker of calculation in his gaze. This tournament of lies had suddenly gained a new, dangerous player. Finally, after a long and tense silence, the king spoke, his voice grudging, his decision clearly reluctant. "Very well," he said. "Let the trial by combat proceed. But let it be known that if Blackwell loses, he will share Lord Edmund's fate." A murmur went through the crowd, a mixture of excitement and apprehension. The stakes had been raised. The trial had become a spectacle, a battle between two of the realm's most formidable warriors, a clash between good and evil, between truth and lies. Blackwell bowed his head slightly, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. "As you wish, Your Majesty," he said. He turned to Isolde, his eyes meeting hers. There was a flicker of something in his gaze, a hint of reassurance, a promise of protection. He would fight for her father, for her, for the bargain they had struck. But he would also fight for himself, for his own honor, for a chance to redeem his past. The tournament of lies had begun, and the outcome would determine not only her father's fate, but the future of Ashenmere and the destiny of the Devil's Blade himself. Chapter 8. A Dance of Deception. The courtyard of Blackwood Keep was transformed into a makeshift arena, the ground cleared and covered with sand, the surrounding walls lined with spectators. The air was thick with anticipation, with the scent of sweat and fear, with the murmur of excited whispers. This was more than just a trial by combat, it was a spectacle, a drama, a clash of titans. Isolde watched from a raised platform, her heart pounding in her chest, her hands clasped tightly together. She was seated near the king, who observed the proceedings with a cold, calculating gaze, his expression betraying nothing of his inner thoughts. Lord Valerius, clad in shining armor, his face flushed with anticipation, paced restlessly near the center of the arena, his sword drawn and gleaming in the pale sunlight. Blackwell, in contrast, stood calmly near the opposite end of the arena, his armor dark and unadorned, his sword sheathed at his side. He seemed unfazed by the crowd, by the pressure, by the knowledge that his life, and Lord Edmund's, hung in the balance. He exuded an aura of quiet confidence, of controlled power, that was both reassuring and unsettling. The king signaled for the combat to begin. Lord Valerius charged forward, his sword raised, his eyes filled with a fierce determination. He was a skilled swordsman, renowned for his speed and agility, his relentless attacks. He unleashed a flurry of blows, aiming to overwhelm Blackwell with his ferocity. But Blackwell met his attack with a calm, effortless grace. He parried Valerius's blows, deflecting his sword with ease, his movements fluid and precise. He seemed to be anticipating Valerius's every move, predicting his attacks before they even began. Isolde watched in breathless suspense, her heart in her throat. She had never seen Blackwell fight before, but she had heard tales of his prowess, of his legendary skill with a sword. Now she was witnessing it firsthand. He was a master swordsman, a warrior who moved with the grace of a dancer and the precision of a surgeon. The combat continued, a dance of death, a clash of steel on steel. Valerius pressed his attack, his face contorted with effort, his breath coming in ragged gasps. But Blackwell remained calm, his movements controlled, his defense impenetrable. He seemed to be toying with Valerius, playing with him, letting him exhaust himself. Isolde began to realize that Blackwell was not just fighting to win, he was fighting to expose Valerius, to reveal his true nature, to show the court the kind of man he really was. He was using the combat as a stage, a platform to demonstrate Valerius's treachery, his ruthlessness, his willingness to do anything to achieve his goals. Blackwell began to goad Valerius, taunting him, mocking him, questioning his honor, his courage, his loyalty. He used words as weapons, sharp and precise, aimed to wound, to provoke, to unmask. "Is this the best you can do, Valerius?" Blackwell asked, his voice calm and clear, carrying across the courtyard. "Is this the strength of the crown's champion?" A man who hides behind lies and fabrications, who accuses innocent men of treason. Valerius, enraged by Blackwell's taunts, redoubled his efforts, his attacks becoming wilder, more desperate. He lunged forward, his sword aimed at Blackwell's heart. But Blackwell sidestepped the blow with ease, his movements fluid and graceful. He disarmed Valerius with a swift, precise movement, sending his sword flying across the arena. Valerius stood there, disarmed and defeated, his chest heaving, his face contorted with rage and humiliation. He had been outmatched, outmaneuvered, exposed. Blackwell stood over him, his sword pointed at Valerius's throat. He could have killed him, ended the combat, claimed victory. But he hesitated. He looked at Isolde, his eyes meeting hers. There was a question in his gaze, a silent plea for understanding. He lowered his sword. "I yield," he said, his voice loud and clear, carrying across the courtyard. A gasp went through the crowd. What was he doing? He had won. He had defeated Valerius. He had proven Lord Edmund's innocence. Why was he yielding? Isolde's heart sank. She didn't understand. Had he betrayed her? Had he made some secret pact with the king? Was this all part of some elaborate plan, some cruel game? The king rose from his seat, his face a mask of fury. "What is the meaning of this, Blackwell?" He thundered. "You have won. Why do you yield?" Blackwell turned to face the king, his expression calm and resolute. "I yield because I have proven my point," he said. "Lord Valerius is a liar, a cheat, a man without honor. He fabricated the evidence against Lord Edmund. He manipulated the court. He sought to use this trial to further his own ambitions." He turned to the crowd, his voice ringing with conviction. "I have fought for justice, for truth, for the honor of a man I believe to be innocent. And I have won. But I will not take the life of a defeated man. That is not my way." He sheathed his sword. "I ask you, your majesty, to reconsider your judgment, to release Lord Edmund, to restore his honor, to punish the true traitor, Lord Valerius." The courtyard was silent, the spectators stunned by Blackwell's words, by his actions, by his unexpected display of mercy and nobility. The dance of deception had reached its climax, and Blackwell had played his hand masterfully. He had not only saved Lord Edmund, but he had also exposed Valerius and challenged the king's authority, all without spilling a single drop of blood. The question now was, would the king heed his plea? Chapter 9. The Serpent's Kiss. The silence in the courtyard was broken only by the nervous shuffling of feet and the hushed whispers of the assembled crowd. All eyes were on King Oberon, awaiting his judgment, his decision, his reaction to Blackwell's audacious challenge. The king's face was a mask of conflicting emotions: anger, frustration, grudging respect, and a flicker of fear. He had been outmaneuvered, outwitted, by a man he had considered an outcast, a pawn in his game. He looked at Blackwell, his eyes narrowed, his gaze cold and calculating. "You have shown great skill, Sir Aldrich," he said, his voice surprisingly calm, "and even greater insolence. You have defied my authority, challenged my judgment, and spared the life of a man you claim to be a traitor." He paused, letting his words hang in the air, the tension in the courtyard palpable. "However," he continued, "you have also proven Lord Edmund's innocence, at least in the eyes of the ancient laws of trial by combat. And I, as king, am bound by those laws." A collective sigh of relief swept through the crowd. Isolde's heart, which had been clenched in fear, began to beat again, a tentative hope flickering within her. "Therefore," the king declared, "I hereby pronounce Lord Edmund of Ashenmere not guilty." A cheer erupted from the crowd, a spontaneous outburst of joy and relief. Lord Edmund, his face pale but his eyes shining with gratitude, looked at Blackwell, then at Isolde, a silent thank you passing between them. But the king was not finished. "However," he said, his voice regaining its sharp edge, "Sir Aldrich Blackwell's actions cannot be ignored. He has defied me, challenged me, and shown a blatant disregard for the authority of the crown." Isolde's heart sank again. She had hoped that Blackwell's sacrifice, his act of mercy, would have earned him the king's gratitude, his forgiveness. But she had underestimated the king's pride, his vanity, his ruthless ambition. Therefore, the king continued, I hereby sentence Sir Aldrich Blackwell to. He was interrupted by a sudden commotion at the edge of the courtyard. A group of guards, led by Lord Valerius, were dragging a struggling figure forward. Master Eldred, the king's own advisor. Eldred's face was pale and drawn, his eyes filled with terror. He was bruised and bleeding, his clothes torn and disheveled. Valerius, his face contorted with rage and desperation, shoved Eldred forward, towards the king. Your Majesty, Valerius cried, his voice hoarse and strained. This man is the true traitor. He confessed everything. He orchestrated the plot against Lord Edmund. He forged the letters. He manipulated the witnesses. He, Eldred, seeing no escape, fell to his knees before the king, his voice a desperate plea. It is true, Your Majesty. I confess. I did it all. Valerius, he forced me. He threatened my family, my life. He promised me power, wealth, a place at your side. The king stared at Eldred, his face a mask of disbelief, then slowly turning to fury. He looked at Valerius, his eyes blazing with anger. Is this true, Valerius? He thundered. Did you orchestrate this plot? Did you betray me, your king? Valerius, seeing his carefully constructed plan unraveling, his ambitions crumbling, lost all control. He drew his dagger, his eyes wild, his face contorted with rage. You are a fool, Oberon, he screamed. A weak, indecisive fool. I should have been king. I would have made this realm strong, powerful, feared. He lunged towards the king, his dagger raised, his intent clear. But before he could reach him, Blackwell moved with lightning speed, intercepting Valerius, his sword a blur of steel. The clash was brief, decisive. Valerius fell to the ground, his dagger clattering on the stones, his lifeblood staining the sand. Silence descended upon the courtyard, a stunned, horrified silence. The king, shaken but unharmed, stared at Valerius's lifeless body, then at Blackwell, his expression a mixture of gratitude and awe. Blackwell sheathed his sword, his face impassive. He had saved the king's life. He had exposed the true traitor. He had averted a coup, a rebellion, a potential civil war. The king finally spoke, his voice trembling slightly. Sir Aldrich, he said, you have saved my life. You have proven your loyalty, your courage, your honor. He paused, struggling to find the words. I owe you a debt I can never repay.
I was wrong about you.
I misjudged you. I ask for your forgiveness. Blackwell bowed his head slightly. There is nothing to forgive, Your Majesty, he said. I did what any loyal subject would have done. The king smiled, a genuine smile, a smile that reached his eyes. You are more than just a loyal subject, Sir Aldrich, he said. You are a hero, a true knight, a friend. He extended his hand to Blackwell, a gesture of reconciliation, of acceptance, of gratitude. Blackwell took the king's hand, their clasp firm and strong. The king then turned to Isolde, his gaze softening. Lady Isolde, he said, you have also shown great courage, great strength, great loyalty to your father. You have endured much, suffered much, and I apologize for the pain and injustice you have endured. He paused, then continued, his voice filled with sincerity. I hereby restore Ashenmere to its full glory, its lands and titles returned, its honor untarnished. And I offer you my protection, my friendship, my gratitude. Isolde, tears streaming down her face, curtsied deeply to the king. Thank you, Your Majesty, she whispered.
Thank you.
The king smiled, then turned back to Blackwell. Sir Aldrich, he said, I offer you a place at my court, a position of honor, a title, lands, wealth, anything you desire. Name your reward. Blackwell hesitated, then looked at Isolde, his eyes meeting hers. There was a question in his gaze, a silent plea for understanding. She nodded. He can have his life back, his honor. He turned back to the king. Your Majesty, he said, I ask for only one thing. The freedom to choose my own path, to live my own life, to follow my heart." The king smiled. It seemed that the bargain made with the devil's blade had been fulfilled, paid with the serpent's kiss of betrayal, revealed and vanquished. The future, uncertain as always, held a glimmer of hope, of a new beginning forged in the crucible of trial and sacrifice. Chapter 10. Beneath the Armor. The immediate aftermath of the trial was a whirlwind of activity. Lord Edmund, weak but recovering, was released and immediately surrounded by loyal retainers and family friends who had dared not show their faces before. Ashenmere was restored to its former glory, the shadow of treason lifted, replaced by a cautious optimism. Valerius's estates were seized, his co-conspirators rounded up, and the king, shaken by the near coup, initiated a series of reforms aimed at rooting out corruption and restoring faith in the crown. Isolde found herself caught between relief and a lingering unease. Her father was safe, Ashenmere was secure, but the bargain she had struck with Blackwell still hung over her, a silent obligation, an unresolved debt. She had pledged herself to him, offered him anything, and he had saved her father, exposed the conspiracy, and even spared the king's life. What did he want? What would he demand? Blackwell, for his part, remained enigmatic. He accepted the king's gratitude with a quiet dignity, declining any offers of titles or lands. He remained at Blackwood Keep for a few days, overseeing the transition of power, ensuring that the king's orders were carried out. He treated Isolde with a polite courtesy, a formality that was both reassuring and frustrating. He seemed to have retreated back into his shell, the vulnerability he had shown during the trial replaced by his usual detachment, his cold reserve. Isolde, emboldened by her success in court, and more than a little curious about the man who now held her future in his hands, decided to confront him. One evening, she found him in the library, the same room where they had first truly spoken, poring over a map of the kingdom. "Sir Aldrich," she said, her voice hesitant but firm. "We need to talk." He looked up, his eyes meeting hers, his expression unreadable. "About what, Lady Isolde?" "About the bargain," she said, her heart pounding in her chest.
"About what you want."
"You saved my father. You saved the king. You have earned your reward."
"What is it?"
He closed the map, his movements deliberate, his gaze unwavering. "I told the king," he said, "I want nothing but the freedom to choose my own path." "But you made a bargain with me," Isolde insisted. "You said I could offer you anything. What do you desire?" He rose and walked towards her, stopping a few feet away, his presence overwhelming. "I desire many things, Lady Isolde," he said softly, his voice a low murmur. "Things I have long denied myself, things I thought I could never have." He reached out and touched her cheek, his fingers surprisingly gentle, sending a shiver down her spine.
"I desire peace," he said.
An end to the fighting, the bloodshed, the constant struggle for survival. He paused, his gaze intense, his eyes searching hers. "I desire redemption," he continued. "A chance to atone for the mistakes of my past, to rebuild my life, to find some measure of happiness." He hesitated again, then spoke the words that Isolde had both longed for and dreaded. "And I desire you, Lady Isolde. Not as a prize, not as a reward, but as a woman, as a companion, as a wife." Isolde's breath caught in her throat. She had expected him to demand her hand in marriage, to claim her as his rightful due. But she had not expected this raw honesty, this vulnerability, this love. She looked at him, truly looked at him, for the first time seeing beyond the armor, beyond the scars, beyond the reputation of the devil's blade. She saw a man who had endured unimaginable hardship, who had been betrayed and broken, who had lost everything he held dear. But she also saw a man of strength, of courage, of honor. A man who had saved her father, who had exposed the conspiracy, who had spared the king's life. A man who had, despite his own pain, shown her kindness, compassion, and a surprising gentleness. She realized, with a sudden, overwhelming clarity, that she had fallen in love with him. Not with the fearsome knight, not with the outcast warrior, but with the man beneath the armor, the man who had shown her his vulnerability, his pain, his longing for a better life. "Aldrich," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. He placed a finger on her lips, silencing her. "Do not answer me now, Isolde," he said softly. "Think about it. Consider what it would mean to be my wife, to share my life, to live in this crumbling fortress, far from the comforts of Ashenmere, far from the glittering court." He removed his finger, his gaze searching hers. "I offer you no promises of ease, of happiness, of security. I offer you only myself, my love, my loyalty, my hope for a future we can build together." He turned and walked towards a window, staring out at the darkening sky. "I will give you time," he said. "Time to decide. Time to choose. And whatever your decision, I will respect it." Isolde watched him, her heart filled with a mixture of love, fear, and a profound sense of gratitude. He had given her a choice, a freedom she had not expected. He had not demanded, he had not coerced, he had simply offered. The bargain, she realized, had been transformed. It was no longer a debt, an obligation, a forced alliance. It was an invitation, a proposal, a chance for a new beginning. The armor had been shed, the scars exposed, and beneath it all, a love had bloomed, fragile but true. The choice, now, was truly hers. And the future, uncertain as it was, held the promise of something beautiful, something real, something worth fighting for. Chapter 11. The King's Decree. The days following Aldrich's proposal were a period of intense introspection for Isolde. She wandered the halls of Blackwood Tor, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. She was drawn to Aldrich, to his strength, his vulnerability, his unexpected tenderness. She admired his courage, his resilience, his unwavering sense of honor. She felt a connection to him, a bond forged in the crucible of shared adversity, a spark of something that went beyond gratitude, beyond obligation. But she was also afraid of leaving Ashenmere, of abandoning her family, of embracing a life of uncertainty, of living with a man who was still, in many ways, a stranger. She was a noble woman, accustomed to a life of comfort and privilege. Could she truly adapt to the harsh realities of Blackwood Tor, to the isolation, the constant threat of danger? She sought counsel from her father, who had returned to Ashenmere, his health slowly recovering. He listened to her concerns, his eyes filled with a mixture of love and understanding. "My dear Isolde," he said, "I owe Sir Aldrich my life, my freedom, my honor. He is a good man, a brave man, a man worthy of your respect. But marriage is a serious matter, a lifelong commitment. You must choose with your heart, not your head. You must consider what will bring you true happiness, true fulfillment." He paused, then added, his voice filled with a gentle wisdom. "Do not be swayed by duty, by obligation, by the expectations of others. Choose for yourself, Isolde. Choose what is best for you." Isolde also confided in Alara, her loyal handmaid, who had accompanied her to Blackwood Tor. Alara, ever practical and down-to-earth, offered a different perspective. "My lady," she said, "Sir Aldrich is a handsome man, a strong man, a man who clearly cares for you. He may not be a king, but he is a hero. And a hero is worth more than 1,000 pampered princes." She paused, then added with a mischievous twinkle in her eye. "Besides, Blackwood Tor may be a bit rustic, but with a little work, we can make it quite comfortable. And think of the gowns you can design. You'll be the envy of every lady in the realm." Isolde laughed, grateful for Alara's unwavering support, her ability to find humor even in the most challenging situations. But the final decision, she knew, rested with her. She spent hours in the chapel, praying for guidance, for clarity, for the strength to make the right choice. She walked the grounds of Blackwood Tor, observing the stark beauty of the landscape, the ruggedness of the fortress, the resilience of the people who lived there. She saw a reflection of Aldrich in everything around her: his strength, his stoicism, his quiet determination to rebuild, to restore, to create something beautiful out of the ruins of the past. One evening, as she was walking along the battlements, Watching the sunset paint the sky with vibrant colors, she saw Aldrich below, training in the courtyard. He moved with a fluid grace, his sword a blur of steel, his body a testament to years of discipline and dedication. He was a warrior, yes, but he was also an artist, a craftsman, a man who found beauty in movement, in strength, in the mastery of his craft. And in that moment, Isolde knew. She knew what she wanted, what she needed, what her heart truly desired. She found Aldrich in his study, the same room where he had proposed. He was seated at his desk, poring over a stack of documents, his brow furrowed in concentration. He looked up as she entered, his eyes questioning, his expression guarded. "Aldrich," she said, her voice clear and steady, her heart filled with a newfound certainty. "I have made my decision." He rose and walked towards her, stopping a few feet away, his gaze intense, his presence overwhelming. "And?" he asked, his voice a low murmur. Isolde met his gaze, her eyes shining with love, with admiration, with a profound sense of peace. "I will marry you, Aldrich," she said. "I will be your wife. I will share your life, your home, your future." A slow smile spread across Aldrich's face, a smile that reached his eyes, transforming his features, making him look younger, more vulnerable, more human. He reached out and took her hands, his fingers intertwining with hers, his touch sending a warmth through her entire being. "Isolde," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You have made me the happiest man in the realm." He drew her closer, his arms encircling her, holding her tight, as if he were afraid she might disappear. He kissed her then, a kiss that was both tender and passionate, a kiss that sealed their vows, their commitment, their love. But their newfound happiness was soon interrupted by an unexpected arrival. A royal messenger, bearing the king's seal, arrived at Blackwood Tor with a decree. King Oberon, still reeling from the recent upheaval and deeply grateful to both Isolde and Aldrich, had decided to formalize their union in a way that would benefit the entire kingdom. The decree stated that Aldrich Blackwell, in recognition of his service to the crown, was to be granted the title of Lord of Blackwood and his lands restored. Furthermore, his marriage to Lady Isolde of Ashenmere was to be a royal wedding, a symbol of unity, of reconciliation, of a new era of peace and prosperity for the realm. Ashenmere and Blackwood, once separated by suspicion and intrigue, were now to be united by love and loyalty. The decree concluded by summoning both Isolde and Aldrich back to court. The king wanted this wedding to be a display, an example. One final twist. The ceremony would take place in 1 week. It was a command, not a request. Chapter 12. Flight from Ashenmere. The king's decree, while seemingly a blessing, threw Isolde and Aldrich's world into a state of controlled chaos. The prospect of a royal wedding, a grand spectacle designed to solidify the king's power and showcase the newly forged alliance between Ashenmere and Blackwood, was daunting. The 1-week deadline was even more so. Isolde, while happy to be marrying Aldrich, felt a growing unease. The speed, the public nature of the event, the king's obvious desire to control the narrative, it all felt forced. She longed for a quiet ceremony, a simple exchange of vows with the man she loved, not a performance for the court. Aldrich, too, was troubled. He had spent years living in the shadows, shunning the court, distrusting the king. He had no desire to be thrust back into the spotlight, to become a pawn in the king's political games. He had won his freedom, his right to choose his own path, and now it felt as if that freedom was being snatched away. They discussed their concerns in the privacy of Aldrich's study, the king's decree lying on the table between them, a symbol of the pressure they were under. "This is not what we wanted, Isolde," Aldrich said, his voice laced with frustration. "A royal wedding, it's a circus, a charade. It's not about us, it's about the king." Isolde nodded, her own anxieties mirroring his. "I know," she said. "I feel trapped, like we're being forced into something we don't want." They considered their options. They could obey the king's decree, submit to his will, and endure the spectacle. But that felt like a betrayal of their own desires, a surrender of their hard-won freedom. They could refuse, defy the king, and risk his wrath. But that would be dangerous, potentially disastrous, for both of them and for Ashenmere. Then, Aldrich had an idea, a daring, reckless plan that was both terrifying and exhilarating. "We could run," he said, his eyes meeting Isolde's, a spark of rebellion flickering within them. "We could leave Blackwood Tor, disappear, find a quiet place, a secluded chapel, and get married on our own terms." Isolde's breath caught in her throat. The thought was both terrifying and liberating. To defy the king, to escape the suffocating pressure of the court, to create their own destiny, it was a risk, a gamble, but it was also a chance for true freedom, true happiness. "But where would we go?" she asked, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and excitement. "How would we survive?" Aldrich smiled, a confident, reassuring smile that eased her anxieties. "I have friends," he said. "Loyal men who served with me, who owe me their lives. They would help us. We could go to the north, to the wild lands beyond the king's reach. We could find a small village, a hidden valley, a place where we could start anew." He reached out and took her hand, his touch sending a warmth through her. "We could be free, Isolde," he said softly. "Free to live our lives, to love each other, to build a future together, on our own terms." The idea, once a whisper, now took hold, blossoming into a possibility, a hope, a dream. Isolde looked at Aldrich, at his determined face, his loving eyes, and she knew that she could trust him, that she could follow him anywhere. "Yes," she said, her voice firm, her heart filled with a newfound courage. "Let's run. Let's escape this gilded cage. Let's create our own destiny." They began to plan, working quickly and quietly, knowing that time was of the essence. They packed a few essential belongings, gathered supplies, and prepared their horses. They left a message for Alara and Silas, explaining their decision, asking for their understanding, and promising to return when it was safe. Under the cover of darkness, they slipped out of Blackwood Tor, just as Isolde had done weeks before, but this time, she was not alone. She was with Aldrich, the man she loved, the man she had chosen, the man who was willing to risk everything for their freedom. They rode swiftly, silently through the night, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and Blackwood Keep. They were fugitives, rebels, defying the king's will, but they were also free, together, embarking on a new adventure, a new life, a new beginning. As the first rays of dawn painted the sky with streaks of pink and gold, they paused on a hilltop, overlooking a vast, untamed wilderness. They had escaped the clutches of the court, the suffocating pressure of the king's decree. They were on their own, their future uncertain, but their love strong, their determination unwavering. The flight from Ashenmere and the rigid expectations of the court had begun, and with it, a new chapter in their lives, a chapter written on their own terms, filled with risk, but also with the promise of a love that defied kings and kingdoms. Chapter 13. The Forest of Lost Souls. Their journey north was arduous and fraught with peril. They avoided the main roads, sticking to ancient tracks and forgotten paths, relying on Aldrich's knowledge of the terrain and the whispered directions provided by the few loyal friends he had contacted before their flight. They slept under the stars, huddled together for warmth, sharing meager rations, their only comfort each other's presence. The landscape grew wilder, more untamed, as they moved further north. They entered a vast, ancient forest, a place known as the Forest of Lost Souls, a realm of towering trees, deep shadows, and whispered legends. It was said to be haunted by the spirits of those who had perished within its depths, a place where travelers often lost their way, never to be seen again. Isolde, despite her initial fear, found a strange beauty in the forest. The towering trees, their branches intertwined like skeletal fingers, created a cathedral-like canopy overhead, filtering the sunlight, casting an ethereal glow on the forest floor. The air was thick with the scent of pine needles and damp earth, the silence broken only by the rustling of leaves, the chirping of birds, and the occasional howl of a distant wolf. Aldrich, ever vigilant, kept a watchful eye on their surroundings, his hand never far from the hilt of his sword. He was a skilled woodsman, able to read the signs of the forest, to track animals, to find food and water, to protect them from the dangers that lurked within the shadows. He taught Isolde how to survive in the wilderness, how to identify edible plants, how to build a fire, how to track animals, how to defend herself. She, in turn, surprised him with her resilience, her adaptability, her willingness to learn. She was no longer the pampered noblewoman he had first met. She was becoming a woman of the wilderness, a survivor, a partner. One evening, as they were camped near a small stream, they heard a noise in the distance, a rustling in the undergrowth. Aldrich, instantly alert, drew his sword, his body tensing, ready to defend them. A figure emerged from the shadows, a young woman, her clothes ragged and torn, her face pale and drawn, her eyes filled with fear. She was armed with a bow and a quiver of arrows, but she seemed more frightened than dangerous.
"Who are you?"
Aldrich demanded, his voice stern, his sword raised. The woman hesitated, her eyes darting between Aldrich and Isolde, assessing them, trying to determine if they were friend or foe. "My name is Lyra," she said softly, her voice trembling slightly. I am lost. I have been wandering in this forest for days. I need help." Isolde, sensing the woman's desperation, stepped forward, her hand outstretched in a gesture of peace. "We will help you," she said. "We are traveling north. You can come with us." Lyra looked at Isolde, then at Aldrich, her eyes filled with a mixture of relief and suspicion. "Why are you in this forest?"
she asked.
"This is a dangerous place. Most people avoid it." Aldrich lowered his sword slightly, but his guard remained up. "We are traveling," he said, choosing his words carefully. "Seeking a place away from the troubles of the realm." Lyra nodded, understanding more than he had said. "I understand," she said. "I, too, am fleeing troubles. I am a fugitive." She recounted her story, a tale of injustice and betrayal, of a noble family destroyed by political intrigue, of a forced marriage to a cruel and powerful lord, of an escape, a flight into the wilderness. Her story echoed Isolde's own, a reminder of the dangers of the court, the ruthlessness of power, the fragility of life. Isolde and Aldrich welcomed Lyra into their small company, sharing their meager supplies, offering her their protection, their friendship. Lyra, in turn, proved to be a valuable addition to their group. She was a skilled archer, a hunter, a tracker, her knowledge of the forest surpassing even Aldrich's. She also had a quiet strength, a resilience, a determination to survive that mirrored their own. Together, they continued their journey north, through the heart of the forest of lost souls. They faced numerous challenges: hunger, thirst, dangerous animals, treacherous terrain, but they faced them together, supporting each other, relying on each other, their bonds strengthening with each passing day. They were 3 fugitives, 3 outcasts, 3 souls seeking refuge in the wilderness, their pasts shrouded in pain and loss, their futures uncertain, but their present united by a shared desire for freedom, for peace, for a new beginning. The forest, once a place of fear and despair, was becoming a sanctuary, a refuge, a place where they could heal, where they could find strength, where they could forge a new destiny, together. The lost souls, it seemed, were finding each other, and in that finding, a glimmer of hope was emerging from the shadows. Chapter 14. Echoes of Betrayal. As they ventured deeper into the forest of lost souls, the past began to catch up with them, not in the form of pursuers from the king, but in the resurfacing of old wounds and buried secrets. Lyra, initially reserved and cautious, gradually opened up to Isolde and Aldrich, sharing more details of her harrowing past. She revealed that her family, the House of Eldoria, had been betrayed by a close ally, Lord Marius, who had coveted their lands and influence. He had orchestrated a plot to frame her father for treason, leading to his execution and the seizure of their estates. Lyra, forced into a betrothal with Marius, had managed to escape on the eve of her wedding, fleeing into the forest with nothing but the clothes on her back and her hunting bow. The parallels between Lyra's story and Isolde's own experiences were striking, creating a bond of shared understanding and empathy between the two women. But it was a detail in Lyra's recounting that sent a chill down Isolde's spine. Lord Marius, Lyra said, her voice filled with bitterness, had a close advisor, a man known for his ruthlessness and his skill in deception. A knight, once disgraced, but now seemingly restored to favor. They called him the Devil's Blade. Isolde's heart stopped. The Devil's Blade. Aldrich. Could it be? Could the man she loved, the man she had pledged her life to, have been involved in the destruction of Lyra's family? She looked at Aldrich, who was sitting across the campfire, his face illuminated by the flickering flames. He seemed calm, composed, unaware of the turmoil that was raging within her. She waited until Lyra was asleep, then confronted him, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and accusation. Aldrich, she said, Lyra, she spoke of a knight, a man who helped Lord Marius destroy her family. She called him the Devil's Blade. Aldrich's expression didn't change, his eyes meeting hers, his gaze unwavering. I know, he said softly. Isolde's breath caught in her throat. You were involved? He nodded slowly. I was, he said. Years ago, before I was accused of treason, before I was banished from court. I was Marius's man. I did his bidding. I helped him. He looked away, his face filled with a mixture of shame and regret. I was young, ambitious, foolish. I believed in Marius, I trusted him. I thought I was doing the right thing, serving my lord, advancing my career. He paused, then continued, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't know the full extent of his plans, the depths of his cruelty. I didn't know he was planning to betray the house of Eldoria, to frame Lyra's father, to destroy them. He looked back at Isolde, his eyes filled with a pain that mirrored her own. When I learned the truth, it was too late. The damage was done. I tried to help Lyra, to warn her, but it was too late. He reached out and took her hand, his touch surprisingly gentle. I have lived with that guilt, that shame for years, Isolde, he said. It is a burden I carry, a stain on my honor that I can never erase. Isolde stared at him, her mind reeling. She had fallen in love with a man who had a dark past, a man who had been involved in terrible things. But she also saw the remorse in his eyes, the pain in his voice, the genuine regret that he carried. She remembered his words, his confession in the library at Blackwood Tor. Good men do terrible things, he had said. War, politics, love, they all have the power to corrupt even the noblest souls. He had been corrupted, yes, but he had also been redeemed. He had fought to clear his name. He had saved her father. He had exposed Valerius. He had spared the king's life. He had chosen a different path, a path of honor, of justice, of love. I understand, she said softly, her voice trembling slightly. I know you are not that man anymore, Aldrich. I know you have changed. He squeezed her hand, his eyes filled with gratitude. Thank you, Isolde, he whispered. Thank you for believing in me. But the echoes of betrayal did not end there. The next day, as they were making their way through a dense section of the forest, they stumbled upon an old, abandoned hunting lodge. It seemed like a safe place to rest, to shelter from the elements. As they explored the lodge, they discovered a hidden room, a secret chamber concealed behind a tapestry. Inside, they found a collection of documents, letters, and maps, all bearing the seal of Lord Marius. Among the documents, they found a letter, written in Marius's own hand, detailing his plans to not only destroy the house of Eldoria, but also to betray King Oberon and seize the throne. The letter mentioned a network of conspirators, a list of names, including Lord Valerius. The pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. Valerius had not acted alone. He had been part of a larger conspiracy, a plot orchestrated by Marius, a plot that had reached the highest levels of the court. And Aldrich, unknowingly, had been a pawn in their game, a tool used to achieve their ambitious, treacherous goals. He had been betrayed too. The discovery brought a sense of closure, a resolution to the lingering questions, the unanswered doubts. It also strengthened the bond between Isolde, Aldrich, and Lyra, three souls united by a shared experience of betrayal, of loss, of a fight for justice. The echoes of the past, while painful, had also served to illuminate the present, to forge a stronger connection, a deeper understanding, a more profound love. They were survivors, not victims. Chapter 15. The Lion and the Lamb. Their journey continued, the discovery of Marius's plot adding a new layer of urgency to their escape. They knew that if the king's men were to find them, they would not only be punished for defying the royal decree, but also for possessing evidence that could expose a widespread conspiracy within the court. They reached the northern borders of the kingdom, the landscape transitioning from dense forest to rugged mountains and windswept valleys. They found refuge in a small, isolated village, nestled in a hidden valley, far from the main roads and the watchful eyes of the king's scouts. The villagers, a hardy and independent people, welcomed them with a cautious hospitality. They were wary of strangers, but Aldrich's quiet strength and Isolde's gentle demeanor earned their trust. They offered them food, shelter, and a place to rest, asking for nothing in return. Isolde and Aldrich, grateful for the villagers' kindness, decided to stay for a few days, to regain their strength, to plan their next move. They knew they couldn't stay forever. The risk of discovery was too great. But they needed time to think, to decide where to go, how to live, how to build a future together. Lyra, having found a measure of peace and companionship with Isolde and Aldrich, decided to stay with them. She had no desire to return to her former life, to the dangers of the court, to the memories of her family's betrayal. She had found a new family, a new purpose, in their shared journey, their shared quest for freedom. One evening, as they were sitting around a campfire, sharing stories and laughter with the villagers, a young boy rushed into the clearing, his face pale and frightened. "Soldiers,"
he cried.
"The king's soldiers. They are coming." Panic erupted in the village. The villagers, fearing for their lives, began to scatter, to hide, to prepare for the worst. Aldrich, instantly alert, drew his sword, his eyes scanning the surrounding forest. He knew that they had been found, that their escape had come to an end. He was prepared to fight, to defend himself, to protect Isolde and Lyra, even if it meant sacrificing his own life. Isolde, her heart pounding in her chest, stood beside Aldrich, her hand resting on his arm. She was afraid, yes, but she was also determined. She would not run. She would not hide. She would face whatever came their way, with courage, with dignity, with the unwavering belief in the love she shared with Aldrich. A contingent of soldiers, clad in the king's livery, emerged from the forest, their swords drawn, their faces grim and determined. They were led by a tall, imposing knight, his armor gleaming in the firelight, his face familiar. It was Sir Gareth, the captain of the king's guard, a man known for his loyalty, his honor, his unwavering devotion to the crown. He was also a friend, a former comrade of Aldrich's, a man who had fought alongside him in many battles. Gareth stopped a few feet from Aldrich, his eyes meeting his expression a mixture of sadness and regret. "Aldrich," he said, his voice heavy with emotion, "I am sorry. I have orders to arrest you, to bring you back to Blackwood Keep." Aldrich nodded slowly, his gaze unwavering. "I understand, Gareth," he said. "You are doing your duty." "I do not wish to fight you, old friend," Gareth said. "But I will do what I must. Surrender peacefully, and I promise you will be treated fairly." Aldrich hesitated, his hand tightening on the hilt of his sword. He looked at Isolde, at Lyra, at the frightened faces of the villagers. He knew that he could fight, that he could probably escape, but it would mean bloodshed, violence, potentially the deaths of innocent people. He made a decision. He lowered his sword. "I yield, Gareth," he said. "I will go with you." Isolde gasped, her eyes filled with disbelief.
"Aldrich, no,"
she cried. "You cannot surrender. They will imprison you, execute you." Aldrich turned to her, his eyes filled with love and reassurance. "Trust me, Isolde," he said softly. "This is the only way. I have a plan." He sheathed his sword and stepped forward, offering himself to Gareth. The soldiers surrounded him, binding his hands, escorting him away. Isolde, her heart breaking, watched him go, her tears flowing freely. She wanted to run after him, to fight for him, to save him. But she knew that he was right. This was the only way. She had to trust him, to believe in him, to hope that his plan, whatever it was, would succeed. It was the act of a lamb facing a lion, but sometimes meekness was not weakness, but the ultimate strength. Chapter 16. A Moment of Grace. Isolde and Lyra were not arrested. Sir Gareth, acting on Aldric's whispered instructions, allowed them to remain in the village, under the watchful eye of the villagers, who, despite their fear of the king's wrath, had grown to respect and admire the fugitive couple. Gareth, torn between his duty to the king and his loyalty to his old friend, promised Isolde that he would do everything in his power to ensure Aldric's safety and fair treatment. The journey back to Blackwood Keep was long and arduous, but Aldric endured it with a quiet dignity, his mind focused on the plan he had concocted, a desperate gamble that was his only hope of saving himself, Isolde, and exposing the truth about Marius's conspiracy. He knew that he would be imprisoned, questioned, possibly tortured. He knew that the king, still shaken by the recent upheaval, would be eager to make an example of him, to demonstrate his authority, to quell any further dissent. But he also knew that he had one advantage, one card to play: the letter he and Isolde had found in Marius's hunting lodge, the letter that detailed the plot to overthrow the king and implicated Lord Valerius and other high-ranking officials. Upon his arrival at Blackwood Keep, Aldric was immediately thrown into a dark, damp cell, deep beneath the castle. He was left alone, in the silence and the darkness, to contemplate his fate. He was not afraid of death, but he was afraid of failing Isolde, of leaving her alone, of not being able to fulfill the promise of a future together. The next day, he was brought before the king, who was seated on his throne, surrounded by his advisors, his court, a silent, watchful audience. The great hall was the same room where he had championed Lord Edmund, where he had exposed Valerius, where he had earned the king's gratitude, only to defy him later. The king looked at Aldric, his expression a mixture of anger and disappointment. "Sir Aldric," he said, his voice cold and sharp, "you have defied my decree. You have fled my court. You have disappointed me." Aldric met the king's gaze, his expression calm and resolute. "I did what I believed was right, your majesty," he said. "I sought only to marry the woman I love, on our own terms." "You could have had a royal wedding," the king retorted. "A celebration, a union that would have strengthened this realm. Instead, you chose to run, to hide, like a common criminal." "I am not a criminal, your majesty," Aldric said, "and I am not afraid of you. I am here to tell you the truth, to expose a conspiracy that threatens not only me, but your entire kingdom." He then revealed the existence of Marius's letter, detailing the plot to overthrow the king, implicating Valerius and other officials. He spoke with passion, with conviction, with the unwavering belief in the truth he was presenting. The king listened in stunned silence, his face paling as Aldric recounted the details of the plot, the names of the conspirators, the evidence that had been found. He realized, with a growing horror, that he had been betrayed, not only by Valerius, but by others he had trusted, others who were still at large, still plotting against him. He ordered the letter to be brought forth, examined, verified. His scribes and advisors confirmed its authenticity, the handwriting matching that of Lord Marius, the seal bearing his family crest. The king, shaken to his core, realized the magnitude of the deception, the depth of the betrayal. He had been blind, foolish, trusting the wrong people, persecuting the innocent. He looked at Aldric, his expression softening, his anger replaced by a grudging respect, a flicker of gratitude. You have saved my kingdom, again," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "You have exposed a conspiracy that could have destroyed everything." He paused, then continued, his voice filled with sincerity. I owe you an apology, Sir Aldric. I misjudged you, again. I condemned you, without hearing your side of the story. I was wrong." He rose from his throne and walked towards Aldric, extending his hand. Ask for your forgiveness again, he said. And I offer you, again, my gratitude, my friendship, my respect. Aldrich took the king's hand, their clasp firm and strong. There is nothing to forgive, your majesty, he said. I did what any loyal subject would have done. The king smiled, a genuine smile, a smile that reached his eyes. You are more than just a loyal subject, Sir Aldrich, he said. You are a true knight, a hero, a savior. He then turned to the assembled court, his voice ringing with authority. Let it be known, he declared, that Sir Aldrich Blackwell is hereby pardoned of all charges, his honor restored, his name cleared. He is a free man, and he has the right to marry whomever he chooses, whenever he chooses, wherever he chooses. A cheer erupted from the crowd, a spontaneous outburst of joy and relief. Aldrich, his heart filled with gratitude, looked around the hall, his eyes searching for Isolde. He saw her then, standing near the entrance, her face radiant with happiness, her eyes shining with tears. She was accompanied by Lyra, who smiled at him, a silent acknowledgement of their shared journey, their shared victory. Aldrich walked towards Isolde, his steps light, his heart soaring. He reached her, took her hands, and drew her into his embrace. He kissed her then, a kiss that was witnessed by the entire court, a kiss that sealed their love, their freedom, their future together. It was a moment of grace, a moment of redemption, a moment of triumph over adversity. The lion had listened, and the lamb had been heard. And in that moment, the kingdom and their hearts found a measure of peace. Chapter 17. The Unveiling. The king, in a gesture of reconciliation and goodwill, offered Aldrich and Isolde the use of the royal chapel at Blackwood Keep for their wedding. He insisted, however, that it be a private ceremony, attended only by a small group of close friends and family, a stark contrast to the grand spectacle he had originally planned. He had learned, through hardship and near disaster, the value of humility, the importance of respecting individual choices, the true meaning of loyalty and love. Isolde and Aldrich, grateful for the king's change of heart, accepted his offer. They had no desire for a lavish celebration, a public display of their union. They wanted only to exchange their vows in a sacred place, surrounded by those who truly cared for them, a quiet affirmation of their love, their commitment, their future together. Alara and Lyra, acting as Isolde's ladies-in-waiting, helped her prepare for the ceremony. They chose a simple gown of ivory silk, adorned with a delicate lace veil, a symbol of purity and innocence. They styled her hair with wildflowers, gathered from the meadows surrounding Blackwood Keep, a tribute to their journey through the wilderness, their escape from the confines of the court. Aldrich, eschewing the elaborate attire of a nobleman, chose to wear a simple tunic of dark blue wool, his only adornment the silver wolf's head pendant, his family sigil, a reminder of his heritage, his resilience, his journey from outcast to hero. The royal chapel, though smaller than the great hall, was a place of beauty and serenity. Stained glass windows, depicting scenes from ancient legends, cast a kaleidoscope of colors on the stone walls. The air was filled with the scent of incense and candles, creating an atmosphere of reverence and peace. The ceremony was officiated by a kindly old priest, a man known for his wisdom and compassion. Lord Edmund, fully recovered and beaming with pride, escorted Isolde down the aisle, his hand trembling slightly as he gave her away to Aldrich. Isolde and Aldrich stood before the altar, their hands clasped together, their eyes locked in a gaze of love and devotion. They exchanged their vows, their voices clear and strong, their words filled with sincerity and promise. They pledged their love, their loyalty, their lives to each other, for better or for worse, in sickness and in health, until death do them part. The priest pronounced them husband and wife, and Aldrich lifted Isolde's veil, his eyes shining with love, with admiration, with a profound sense of gratitude. He kissed her then, a tender, passionate kiss that sealed their union, their commitment, their future together. The small gathering erupted in applause and cheers, a heartfelt expression of joy and celebration. Lord Edmund embraced his daughter and his new son-in-law, his eyes filled with tears of happiness. Alara and Lyra hugged Isolde, their faces radiant with smiles. Even Sir Gareth, standing at the back of the chapel, his duty fulfilled, his loyalty rewarded, allowed himself a small smile of satisfaction. After the ceremony, a simple feast was held in a smaller hall within Blackwood Keep. The atmosphere was relaxed and informal, filled with laughter, conversation, and heartfelt toasts. The king, though not present in person, sent a generous gift, a magnificent tapestry depicting the union of a lion and a lamb, a symbol of their love story, their triumph over adversity, their contribution to the peace and stability of the realm. As the evening drew to a close, Isolde and Aldrich slipped away from the festivities, seeking a moment of solitude, a chance to reflect on their journey, their love, their future. They stood on the battlements of Blackwood Tor, overlooking the moonlit landscape, the same place where they had stood before their flight, before their ordeal, before their ultimate triumph. "We did it, Isolde," Aldrich said softly, his arm around her waist, drawing her close. "We survived. We are together. We are free." Isolde leaned her head against his shoulder, her heart filled with a profound sense of peace and contentment. "Yes," she said.
"We did.
And we have so much to be grateful for." They spoke of their plans for the future, of rebuilding Blackwood Tor, of restoring its lands and prosperity, of creating a home, a family, a legacy. They spoke of their desire to help others, to use their influence to promote justice, to heal the wounds of the past, to build a better world. The unveiling of their marriage was not a grand pronouncement, but a quiet confirmation of a love that had endured trials, overcome obstacles, and ultimately triumphed. It was the unveiling of their true selves, their strength, their resilience, their capacity for love and forgiveness. And as they looked out at the vast expanse before them, they knew that their journey was just beginning, a journey filled with challenges, yes, but also with endless possibilities, with hope, with love, with the promise of a future they would build together, side by side, hand in hand. Chapter 18. Scars of the Heart. The first few months of their marriage were a period of adjustment and rediscovery. Isolde, accustomed to the comforts and routines of Ashenmere, adapted to the more rustic and isolated life at Blackwood Tor with a grace and resilience that surprised even Aldrich. She embraced her new role as Lady of Blackwood, overseeing the household, managing the estate, and engaging with a local community. She learned to ride, to hunt, to defend herself, skills that she had never needed before, but now embraced with a newfound confidence. Aldrich, in turn, worked tirelessly to rebuild Blackwood Tor, restoring its defenses, repairing its crumbling walls, and revitalizing its surrounding lands. He used his influence with the king to secure resources and support, attracting skilled craftsmen, farmers, and merchants to the area. He also worked to heal the wounds of the past, reaching out to those who had been wronged by Marius and Valerius, offering them compensation, justice, and a chance to rebuild their lives. Their relationship deepened, their love growing stronger with each passing day. They shared their joys and sorrows, their hopes and fears, their dreams and ambitions. They learned to communicate openly and honestly, to trust each other implicitly, to support each other through thick and thin. But the scars of the past, both physical and emotional, remained. Aldrich still carried the burden of his guilt, his shame, for his involvement in Marius's plot, his betrayal of the House of Eldoria. He had nightmares, flashbacks, moments of intense self-doubt and self-recrimination. Isolde, too, struggled with the lingering effects of her ordeal. She had nightmares about her father's imprisonment, about the trial, about the constant threat of danger. She sometimes felt overwhelmed by the responsibilities of her new role, by the isolation of Blackwood Tor, by the memories of her former life. One evening, as they were sitting by the fire in their private chamber, Aldrich confessed his struggles to Isolde. "I sometimes feel like I don't deserve you, Isolde," he said, his voice filled with anguish. "I have done terrible things. I have caused so much pain. I am damaged." Isolde took his hand, her touch gentle and reassuring. "Aldrich," she said, "we all have scars. We all have made mistakes. The past is the past. You have atoned for your sins. You have redeemed yourself. You are a good man, a brave man, a loving man. And I love you with all my heart." She shared her own struggles with him, her nightmares, her fears, her moments of doubt. She confessed that she sometimes missed Ashenmere, her family, her friends, the life she had known before. They held each other close, sharing their pain, their vulnerability, their love. They realized that healing was a process, a journey, not a destination. It required patience, understanding, forgiveness, and most importantly, each other. They decided to seek help, to find ways to cope with their emotional scars. They consulted with the old priest who had married them, seeking his guidance and wisdom. They learned to meditate, to pray, to find solace in their faith. They also sought out Lyra, who had become a trusted friend and confidant. Lyra, having endured her own share of trauma and loss, offered them a unique perspective, a shared understanding, a sense of camaraderie. "We are all wounded, in one way or another," Lyra said. "But wounds can heal. Scars can fade. And sometimes, the scars we carry make us stronger, more resilient, more compassionate." They began to incorporate rituals into their daily lives, small acts of remembrance, of healing, of forgiveness. They planted a garden in the courtyard of Blackwood Tor, filled with flowers and herbs, a symbol of new life, of growth, of beauty emerging from the ruins of the past. They established a fund to help the victims of Marius and Valerius, providing them with financial assistance, legal support, and a chance to rebuild their lives. They made a pilgrimage to the shrine of St. Jude, the patron saint of lost causes, seeking his intercession, his blessing, his guidance. Slowly, gradually, the scars of their hearts began to heal. The nightmares became less frequent, the flashbacks less intense, the moments of doubt less overwhelming. They found strength in each other, in their love, in their shared commitment to building a better future. They realized that the past could not be erased, but it could be learned from, forgiven, and ultimately transcended. The scars remained, yes, but they were no longer a source of pain, but a reminder of their resilience, their strength, their capacity for love and forgiveness. They were a testament to their journey, their survival, their triumph over adversity. And in those scars, they found a beauty, a depth, a profound sense of gratitude for the life they had been given, the love they had found, the future they were building together. Chapter 19. The Reckoning. Several years passed, and Blackwood Tor flourished under Aldrich and Isolde's stewardship. The fortress, once a crumbling ruin, was now a thriving center of trade and agriculture. The surrounding lands, once barren and neglected, were now fertile and productive. The people, once fearful and suspicious, were now loyal and prosperous. Isolde and Aldrich had been blessed with 2 children, a son, Edmund, named after Isolde's father, and a daughter, Lyra, named after their dear friend. The children brought joy and laughter to Blackwood Tor, filling its halls with a sense of life and hope. Lyra, having found a home and a family with Isolde and Aldrich, had become an integral part of their lives. She served as a trusted advisor, a skilled huntress, and a loving aunt to the children. She had also found love herself, marrying a young knight, Sir Calin, who had joined Aldrich's service and proven himself to be a loyal and honorable man. One autumn day, a royal messenger arrived at Blackwood Tor, bearing a summons from King Oberon. The king requested Aldrich and Isolde's presence at court to attend a grand council, a gathering of the realm's most influential lords and ladies. Aldrich and Isolde were hesitant to return to court, to the place of their past trials and tribulations. But they also knew that they could not ignore the king's summons, that they had a duty to serve their realm, to contribute to its stability and prosperity. They traveled to Blackwood Keep, accompanied by Lyra and Sir Calin, leaving their children in the care of Alara and Silas, who had remained loyal and devoted servants throughout the years. The court was as grand and opulent as they remembered, filled with glittering courtiers, ambitious nobles, and shadowy figures. But Aldrich and Isolde were no longer intimidated by the pomp and circumstance, by the intrigues and machinations. They had faced their demons, they had overcome their fears, they had earned their place among the realm's elite. The king welcomed them warmly, his demeanor genuinely friendly and respectful. He had aged considerably, his hair now white, his face lined with wrinkles, but his eyes still held a spark of intelligence and determination. "Aldrich, Isolde," he said, "I am grateful for your presence. I have summoned you here today, along with the other leaders of the realm, to discuss a matter of grave importance." He then revealed that the neighboring kingdom of Northwood, ruled by the ambitious and ruthless King Forlag, was preparing for war. Forlag had long coveted the lands and resources of Oberon's kingdom, and he had now amassed a formidable army, poised to invade. The king needed the support of his lords and ladies, their armies, their resources, to defend the realm against this imminent threat. He asked for their counsel, their advice, their commitment to the war effort. The council was divided. Some lords, eager for glory and conquest, advocated for a preemptive strike, an invasion of Northwood before Forlag could attack. Others, fearing the costs and consequences of war, urged caution, diplomacy, a negotiated settlement. Aldrich, remembering the horrors of his past, the bloodshed, the betrayal, the futility of violence, spoke out against war. "Your Majesty," he said, "war is a terrible thing. It brings only death, destruction, and suffering. We should explore all other options before resorting to violence. We should seek a peaceful resolution, a diplomatic solution, a way to avoid bloodshed." Isolde, supporting her husband, spoke of the importance of compassion, of understanding, of seeking common ground with their neighbors. "We should not see the people of Northwood as our enemies," she said. "They are human beings, just like us, with their own hopes and fears, their own dreams and aspirations. We should strive to build bridges, not walls, to foster cooperation, not conflict." Their words, spoken with passion and conviction, resonated with many in the council. They reminded the lords and ladies of the human cost of war, the importance of peace, the value of diplomacy. But King Forlag was not interested in peace. He sent emissaries to Blackwood Keep, not with offers of negotiation, but with demands, ultimatums, threats. He demanded that Oberon cede vast territories, pay exorbitant tributes, and acknowledge him as the supreme ruler of both kingdoms. The king, outraged by Forlag's arrogance and aggression, refused his demands. War was inevitable. Aldrich, despite his aversion to violence, knew that he had a duty to defend his realm, his people, his family. He pledged his support to the king, offering his services as a military commander, his expertise in warfare, his unwavering loyalty. Isolde, though fearful for her husband's safety, supported his decision. She knew that he was a warrior, a leader, a man who would fight for what he believed in, for what was right. She would remain at Blackwood Tor, managing the estate, caring for their children, and praying for his safe return. The reckoning, long dreaded, had arrived. But it was not a reckoning of vengeance, of retribution, of settling old scores. It was a reckoning of duty, of responsibility, of defending one's home, one's family, one's values. Aldrich, the former outcast, the Devil's Blade, would once again ride to war, but this time he would fight not for personal gain, not for ambition, but for peace, for justice, for the future of his realm. And Isolde, the former pawn, the noble woman turned warrior's wife, would stand by his side, in spirit if not in body, her love, her strength, her unwavering belief in him, his guiding light, his constant source of hope. Chapter 20. A Crown of Thorns. The war with Northwood was long and brutal, a series of bloody battles, sieges, and skirmishes that tested the strength and resilience of both kingdoms. Aldrich, leading the armies of Blackwood and Ashenmere, proved himself to be a brilliant strategist and a courageous commander. He fought with skill and determination, but also with compassion and restraint, always seeking to minimize casualties, to protect the innocent, to avoid unnecessary bloodshed. He earned the respect and admiration of his soldiers, who followed him loyally, trusting in his leadership, his judgment, his unwavering commitment to their well-being. He also earned the respect of his enemies, who recognized his prowess as a warrior, his honor as a knight, his humanity as a man. Isolde, remaining at Blackwood Tor, managed the estate with efficiency and skill, ensuring that the lands remained productive, the people fed and protected. She also organized relief efforts for the wounded soldiers, providing them with medical care, food, and shelter. She became a symbol of hope and resilience, a beacon of light in a time of darkness and despair. Lyra and Sir Calin fought alongside Aldrich, proving themselves to be brave and loyal companions. They distinguished themselves in battle, earning the respect and admiration of their fellow soldiers. The war reached its climax in a final, decisive battle on the plains of Northwood. The armies of both kingdoms clashed in a fierce and bloody encounter, the fate of the realm hanging in the balance. Aldrich, leading the charge, fought his way through the enemy ranks, seeking out King Forlag, the man responsible for the war, the architect of so much suffering. He found Forlag in the thick of the battle, surrounded by his elite guard. Forlag was a formidable warrior, his armor gleaming, his sword dripping with blood. He fought with a savage fury, his eyes filled with hatred and ambition. Aldrich and Forlag engaged in a fierce duel, their swords clashing, their bodies straining, their wills locked in a mortal struggle. It was a battle between two kings, two warriors, two ideologies. Aldrich, though weary and wounded, fought with the strength of his convictions, with the love for his family, with the hope for a better future. He parried Forlag's blows, deflected his attacks, and finally, with a swift and decisive movement, disarmed him. Forlag stood there, defeated, his chest heaving, his face contorted with rage and despair. He had lost. His ambition had been thwarted. His dreams of conquest had turned to ashes. Aldrich could have killed him, ended his life, claimed victory. But he hesitated. He remembered his own past, his own mistakes, his own redemption. He saw in Forlag a reflection of his former self, a man consumed by ambition, blinded by hatred, lost in a world of violence and deceit. He lowered his sword. "I will not kill you, Forlag," he said. "Your life is not mine to take. I offer you mercy, a chance to surrender, to end this war, to save your people from further suffering." Forlag, stunned by Aldrich's unexpected act of compassion, stared at him in disbelief. He had expected death, humiliation, revenge. He had not expected mercy. He slowly knelt before Aldrich, his head bowed in submission. "I surrender," he said, his voice hoarse and strained. "I accept your mercy." The battle ended. The war was over. Aldrich, the Devil's Blade, had become the peacemaker, the victor who had chosen mercy over vengeance, compassion over hatred, peace over war. The armies of Blackwood and Ashenmere returned home, victorious but weary, their hearts filled with a mixture of joy and sorrow. They had defended their realm, they had secured their freedom, but they had also paid a heavy price. Aldrich was hailed as a hero, a savior, a true king. The people cheered him, celebrated him, honored him. But he shunned the accolades, the praise, the adoration. He knew that true victory was not about conquest, but about peace, not about power, but about justice, not about glory, but about love. King Oberon, deeply grateful for Aldrich's service, offered him the crown of Northwood, the right to rule both kingdoms, to unite them under one banner. But Aldrich refused. "I do not seek power, your majesty," he said. "I do not desire a crown. I only wish to return to my home, to my family, to the life I have built with Isolde." He suggested that the two kingdoms remain separate, but united in a pact of peace and cooperation, a mutual defense agreement, a commitment to resolving their differences through diplomacy, not violence. Oberon, respecting Aldrich's wishes, agreed to his proposal. He signed a treaty, with the newly appointed regent of Northwood Forlag having abdicated and retreated to a monastery, establishing a lasting peace between the two kingdoms. Aldrich and Isolde returned to Blackwood Tor, where they were greeted with open arms by their children, their friends, their people. They had endured much, suffered much, but they had also triumphed, not through violence and conquest, but through love, compassion, and an unwavering commitment to peace. The crown of thorns, the symbol of suffering and sacrifice, had been transformed into a symbol of hope, of redemption, of a new beginning. They had chosen their path, and it had led them home. Epilogue. The years that followed were a time of peace and prosperity for both Blackwood and Ashenmere, and indeed, for the entire realm. Aldrich and Isolde, working together, continued to rebuild and improve their lands, fostering trade, encouraging agriculture, and promoting justice and equality. They became known as wise and benevolent rulers, loved and respected by their people. Their children, Edmund and Lyra, grew into strong and capable young adults, inheriting their parents' best qualities: their courage, their compassion, their unwavering sense of honor. Edmund, trained in the arts of war and diplomacy, became a skilled knight and a trusted advisor to his father. Lyra, inheriting her mother's grace and intelligence and her namesake's skill with a bow, became a renowned huntress and a protector of the forest and its creatures. Lyra and Sir Calin had children of their own, strengthening the bonds of friendship and kinship between the two families. The families often gathered at Blackwood Tor or Ashenmere, sharing meals, stories, and laughter, their lives intertwined, their destinies forever linked. King Oberon, having learned from his past mistakes, ruled wisely and justly, guided by the counsel of Aldrich and other trusted advisors. He fostered peace and cooperation with Northwood, and the two kingdoms, once bitter enemies, became allies and trading partners. Aldrich and Isolde, as they grew older, often reflected on their journey, their trials, their triumphs. They remembered the darkness of their past, the pain of their losses, the challenges they had overcome. But they also remembered the love they had found, the friendships they had forged, the hope they had kindled. They often walked together in the garden they had planted at Blackwood Tor, the flowers and herbs a vibrant testament to their resilience, their growth, their enduring love. They would sit on a stone bench, overlooking the valley, watching the sunset paint the sky with breathtaking colors. One evening, as they were sitting together, hand in hand, Aldrich turned to Isolde, his eyes filled with a love that had only deepened with time. "Isolde," he said softly, "do you remember the bargain we made so many years ago?" Isolde smiled, her heart filled with a profound sense of peace and contentment. "How could I forget?" she said. "It was the beginning of our story. I asked you for anything," Aldrich said, "and you gave me everything. You gave me your love, your trust, your life. You gave me a home, a family, a future. You gave me more than I ever deserved." Isolde leaned her head against his shoulder, her voice filled with tenderness. "And you, Aldrich, gave me freedom, purpose, and a love that transcends all things. You showed me the true meaning of courage, of honor, of forgiveness. You saved my father, you saved the kingdom, you saved me." They sat in silence for a long moment, their hearts overflowing with gratitude, with love, with a profound sense of peace. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow on the landscape, illuminating the walls of Blackwood Tor, a fortress that had become a sanctuary, a home, a symbol of their enduring love. The deal with the Devil's Blade had been fulfilled, not with gold or land, not with power or conquest, but with love, forgiveness, and the enduring strength of the human spirit. It was a story of redemption, of transformation, of a love that had conquered all obstacles, a love that would last for eternity. They were together. It was all they had ever truly desired. The end.